We stand firmly by NATO and the Western Alliance. We are not a neutralist party, and neutralism has no part or place in our policies. We want to see Britain and other European countries make a more effective contribution to NATO. Some lunatic somewhere, not in Britain and France, one trusts, is going to touch off a nuclear war.
Was Mr. Harold Wilson arriving at the White House for his conference with President Kennedy on the last day of his visit to Washington. Until this meeting with the President, Mr. Wilson's visit had not made the front pages in the United States. But among political leaders in Washington, it was regarded as highly important. They look upon him as the man most likely to succeed Mr. Macmillan as the next Prime Minister of Great Britain, and therefore the leader of their most influential ally. Up to now, he has been an unknown quantity to them, and they've been just as interested in making a personal judgment on the man as listening to his explanations of Labour Party policies. From Mr. Wilson's point of view, the visit has been important because it's enabled him to make the same contacts in Washington as Mr. Hugh Gaitskell had. He also now has a much greater and more confidential insight into American policies. In addition, of course, his international stature has been enhanced by the readiness with which he's been received by President Kennedy and his administration.
The visit to the White House was the last big engagement of a crowded 4 days in Washington. His first call was at America's Foreign Office, the State Department, where he was given a confidential briefing on American foreign policy. Wilson's visit coincided with the beginning of the tourist season in Washington, but he had no opportunity to join the crowds and little time to see the sights. Americans were surprised to see the British opposition leader making his rounds of Washington unaccompanied by any secretaries or aides. This raised a few eyebrows at the Capitol, America's Houses of Parliament, where senators and congressmen have large personal staffs paid for out of public funds. Most of the leading senators were there when he went to see the powerful Foreign Relations Committee. Wilson's conversations were, of course, private, but he made a public showing during his visit at the National Press Club.
Now, Mr. Chairman, on defense, our position here is clear. We stand firmly by NATO and the Western Alliance. We are not a neutralist party, and neutralism has no part or place in our policies. We want to see Britain and other European countries make a more effective contribution to NATO. We do not believe that this increase is possible if we pour out our substance on the vain effort to maintain the so-called independent, so-called British, so-called deterrent. Because it isn't independent, it isn't going to be British, and its deterrent value in our view adds nothing to the effectiveness of Western deterrent striking power. Every American pressman that I meet asks whether a Labour government would repudiate the Nassau Agreement. I don't like the word repudiate, which implies breaking faith with a partner. And I have my doubts. May I say, these were doubts I formed before I came here. I'm not basing what I'm now saying on any talks I've had here. I have my doubts about the enthusiasm with which the United States administration approached the Nassau Agreement. And my answer to this question is that a Labour government's first task will be to survey the defence position that we inherit. As some would put it, to survey the shambles. Then to enter into discussions with our American partners about Nassau and about our broader approach to NATO. In view of our policy on deterrence, we should then renegotiate, I've heard the word denegotiate suggested, the agreement.
But the first priority for Britain, he said, is to build up her economic strength.
Our ability, under any government, to restore the lost dynamic to Britain's economic society, to restore a sense of economic and social and moral purpose, will have far more bearing on our value as an ally and a partner than any vain nuclear posturings. And it may not be long before the same truth dawns on President de Gaulle. Because we reject the notion that Britain is fated by history or some vicious twist of fate or by internal debility to be treated as the sick man of Europe. We reject this. We are not. We have a reservoir of unused and underused talent, of skill and craftsmanship, of inventiveness and ingenuity, of administrative ability and scientific creativeness, which, if mobilized, will, within a measurable period of time, enable us to become not the workshop of the world, that's no longer our role, but the pilot plant, the tool room of the world. Our scientists are among the finest in the world. The tragedy is we don't produce enough of them, and those we do produce we don't use intelligently. Some of them we fail even to hold in our own country. And the reason for this is not, as one noble lord has said, the deficiencies in your educational system. The reason is deficiencies in our industrial and governmental system, that we do not provide the status and opportunities and above all the key role in our society that the needs of the 1960s demand.
Then questions. Most important of all, they wanted more details of Labour's defence policy.
Would you please expand regarding the lines upon which you would like to modify the Nassau Agreement?
Well, I think it follows from what I said, doesn't it, that since our policy is that Britain's role in the alliance should be the strengthening of the conventional contribution, that those parts of the Nassau Agreement that envisage the supply to Britain of Polaris submarines for Britain's own use in a national emergency, or indeed the supply of the know-how for Britain to build the Polaris submarines, that this would no longer be realistic in relation to our future defense policy. So that is what we mean in relation to the denegotiation of the Nassau Agreement.
What about nationalisation? Would Labour take over industries like steel and transport?
Steel, yes. And may I say, this is one of the big issues in the Rotherham by-election last week, the result of which you can look up. Would the Labour Party complete nationalisation of Britain's transportation? I'm not quite sure after the Beeching report whether there's going to be much of Britain's transportation left. But our policy here is that our transport problems cannot be solved except on the basis of an integrated transport system. The problems of railways, and of course every country's got difficulties with railways, so I understand. As a result of road competition, I think there's only one railway system in the world paying its way, and I can't remember which one that is at the moment. I think it's Japan. This can only be solved by, as I say, some integration. We have the system today where all the profitable traffics are creamed off by road haulage. We have said in our policy statement that we shall rebuild this integrated system, not so much on the basis of buying up every lorry, every little, every truck, every little backstreet garage that's got 4 or 5 broken down lorries together with the goodwill and pay enormous sums for them as we did last time. But on the basis of taking the lid off the already nationalized British road services.
The Labour Party's name caused curiosity among American reporters.
Why don't we change the name of the Labour Party? We don't see why we should. It is a party, a name which has high standing in the United Kingdom, as is witnessed by recent public opinion polls and by-elections. And we don't like sailing under false colours. There have been cases in British history where parties have changed their name, but what the British electorate is interested in is not whether they've changed their name, but whether they've changed their policy. As far as as far as the Labour Party is concerned, we intend to change neither its name nor its present policy, though of course that policy will evolve pragmatically with changing circumstances at home and abroad.
Thank you very much, sir. One of the problems that Mr. Wilson has been discussing with the United States administration here in Washington is the question of economic stagnation, particularly unemployment. The basic difference between the unemployment problem that we have in Britain and the one that they have here is that the American problem is more than twice as great as ours.
In Washington, the colored people are the worst hit. But it's the same story for black and white in many American industrial areas. They hang around their union offices hoping for casual work. Nearly 5 million workers are unemployed, and the figures show every sign of increasing. If we had this rate of unemployment in Britain, it would mean 1.5 million continuously on the dole, instead of well under 1 million, which we consider bad enough. One particularly serious aspect of the problem is the especially high rate of unemployment among young people. Nearly 2 million of them at the age when they should be learning a trade. Some children now at school, and again this applies particularly to the colored people, will become the third generation on public assistance. On the surface, America still looks and is a wealthy country, but the national wealth is increasing by less than 3%, about half the rate in the common market countries. This is a problem similar to Britain's. Wealth is not keeping up with the increased productivity caused by automation, and the labor force is growing. Unless more and more jobs are created, it's estimated that unemployment will double to over 12% in the next 10 years. The American standard of living is 2 or 3 times as high as ours, but that can make the threat of losing your job even more frightening. It can also mean a widening gap between the rich and the poor, the old story of luxury flats and slum houses. Somehow, money must be put in the pockets of those who want to spend it on the things they need. A program of public works, roads, buildings, dams, and so on, would be one way of providing jobs and wages to spend. But that takes time to show results. A quicker way is to reduce taxes and put more spending money in people's pockets overnight. Fitch talked about the problem with President Kennedy's chief economic advisor, Walter Heller, a former university professor.
Heller, why did you advise the president to cut taxes as a means of creating more jobs?
Well, as we've seen the performance of the American economy in the past 6 years, we've had a considerable amount of slack in the economy and a slower rate of growth. I know that's a problem that's also characterized the United Kingdom. And it is the feeling that the tax system has been a drag both on markets and on incentives, and that by cutting taxes, one would increase incomes, increase production, increase jobs, and indeed increase the tax base and restore the revenues to their pre-tax cut levels in very short order. That's been the experience in 2 or 3 previous tax cuts in our post-war period.
But with this big one, isn't there a considerable danger of inflation?
No. One can't ever say positively there's no danger, but consider this fact, that this country, together with Canada, has had the lowest increase in prices and in wage rates of the whole industrial world in the past 5 years, in the past 2 years, in the past year. Consider further the fact that given, first of all, this base, that in addition, raw materials prices are at low figures, that in addition, competition both within the country and without the country is very sharp, and finally, and most important, we have 6% unemployment. Our operating rates are about 85% of capacity. We have a great deal of slack to absorb the increased purchasing power and the increased demand that will come from the tax cut. It will not run off into inflation.
Are you confident that these tax cuts are going to get through Congress?
Well, Congress, after all, the President proposes and the Congress disposes in our governmental system. Yes, I think that a good substantial tax cut will get through the Congress. One can't be 100% sure, but I believe that Congress will accept this. Now, don't misunderstand me. Tax cuts don't have the easy political appeal that a lot of people think in this country. We've had 3 tax cuts, interestingly enough, since the war, and each time the majority party in Congress that presided over the tax cut was turned out and found itself the minority party in the next Congress. So that the appeal of tax cuts politically is the creation of jobs and higher incomes and higher profits, not the tax cut itself.
Congress is now deciding whether to give the President his tax cuts. Fitch spoke to Senator Paul Douglas, one of the most influential senators and an expert economist.
Senator, why is there so much unemployment in the United States?
Well, Mr. Fitch, I think it's basically due to the failure of the American economy in the last 5 or 6 years to grow at an adequate rate. We've been growing only at the rate of 2.5% a year. Population's been coming on at the growth rate of 1.7% a year. Output per man hour has been rising, so that the effect has been that the increase in the demand for labor has been relatively slight. And this at a time when the supply of labor has been increasing very rapidly, because the high birth rates of the 1940s are now beginning to come upon the labor market in the form of young workers who find it very difficult to get placed.
Is there any pressure in Congress for the President to cut foreign aid and divert these funds to help your own unemployed?
Oh yes, and very strong pressure. And if the balance of payments continues against us, and there's a serious drain upon gold, we may be compelled to do this. We may be compelled to reduce foreign aid, to reduce our military commitments, to put a limit on the amount of money that tourists can spend abroad, and on capital movements. America is not the tremendously strong country that we were pictured as being. And perhaps you Europeans can have a greater sympathy for us now that we're in these difficulties.
When Mr. Wilson emerged from the White House after his hour with the President, the usual cluster of reporters wanted to know what they'd talked about. Mr. Wilson wasn't saying, but it was clear that they'd got along well together.
Reactions from the American press. The Washington Daily News, he made an excellent first impression. The New York Times, Mr. Wilson is a very unusual man, an unknown quantity.
Away from the babble and confusion of the White House steps, Mr. Wilson kept an appointment with George Fitch.
Before you came, would you have said that there was suspicion about the Labour Party's loyalty to NATO?
I wouldn't have thought so among the administration leaders. They know what Hugh Gaitskell and I and all of us have said about the need not only to be loyal to NATO, but to strengthen our relations with NATO. But perhaps among some members of the press, there was a certain amount of lack of information before I came.
Your insistence that the Nassau Agreement should be, I think you say, denegotiated, hasn't that caused any concern?
No, I don't think so, because as we look at it, I won't say any administration leader has said this, they were never very keen on the idea of contributing to a so-called independent, so-called British, so-called deterrent, which is what Nassau was about. They're much more interested in strengthening the alliance generally.
Without giving away any secrets of your talks with the President and so on, would you say that the administration thinking on NATO, the future of NATO and policy towards Europe is a bit confused?
Well, everyone is having to rethink the position after President de Gaulle's intervention in the European scene recently. I think the administration are still sounding out opinion in Europe about some of their new proposals, and I don't think they're ready yet. They may not be for a few weeks to put their ideas to the other members of the alliance.
You've also been talking a lot about strengthening Britain's conventional forces.
Yes.
Has there been any attempt to persuade you to reintroduce conscription if you become Prime Minister?
None at all, because, of course, I think they recognize that the important thing about the conventional contribution to NATO is the equipment, not only the firepower, but the mobility and the signals communication equipment. And, of course, if we stop wasting, as we feel, hundreds of millions on trying to maintain an independent deterrent that doesn't really exist, we shall have money available for additional recruitment and for filling in gaps, specialist gaps in the armed forces.
In private conversation, have you found members of the administration sympathetic of your policy of giving up Britain's independent nuclear deterrent?
Well, we have had all the talks on the basis, of course, that none of us would reveal what was said. But I don't think it's any secret that for 2 or 3 years, as witnessed by Mr. McNamara's speech at Ann Arbor last year, that they believe that there's a real danger in spreading independent deterrence to a lot of independent countries. But once that starts, with Britain and France, it can spread to a lot more countries, and then some lunatic somewhere, not in Britain and France, one trusts, is going to touch off a nuclear war.
One often reads that if you become Prime Minister, your administration will be based upon the Kennedy model. Is this still valid after your trip to Washington?
Well, we don't believe all we read, do we? But, of course, the Kennedy model, the general American model, is to bring in people from all over the country. There are members of his cabinet that I don't think he knew before he appointed them. Our principle is, of course, to fill the cabinet posts from members of the House of Commons, 1 or 2 from the House of Lords, and I would feel that we have in the Labour Party in the House of Commons plenty of people to fill perhaps more than one cabinet.
Have you been impressed, though, with the
Yes,
personnel?
I've been extremely impressed, not only at the cabinet level, where they're very, very good, but at all levels immediately below that. And certainly the way they've drawn on new thinking outside the government does provide a lesson, perhaps, for us to follow.
Do you feel, as Prime Minister, you could work closely with these people?
Well, we have to win the election before we start counting those particular chickens, but I don't think there'll be any difficulty in any British government of any party working closely with the United States generally, and certainly with this particular administration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.